On this Wednesday night, Canadians executed in China after being sentenced to death. The reaction?
We strongly condemn what happened.
What we know about the cases and the message it sends to Canadians traveling in China. Trump says he'd prefer to work with a Liberal government in Canada, while the Conservative leader is trying to capitalize on that. Americans siding with Canada.
There's no justification for these tariffs.
The U.S. citizens angry over Trump's trade war. And throne theft, the 18-carat golden toilet stolen from a palace. How police had something to go on to flush out the criminals.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Canadian government has confirmed 4 Canadians were executed in China earlier this year. The revelations were first reported in the Globe and Mail, but neither the Chinese nor the Canadian government has given any detail on who they were. China says they were sentenced to death for drug-related crimes. Global Affairs Canada says Canada repeatedly called for clemency in their cases. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
A rare move from Beijing is the latest escalation in the Canada-China relationship.
There are 4 Canadians that have been executed, and therefore we strongly condemn what happened.
Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly wouldn't confirm who was killed. Executions that came despite high-level interventions.
I've asked personally also leniency, and also the former Prime Minister did so.
There are approximately 100 Canadians in Chinese jail, 4 known to be on death row, including Robert Schellenberg, who was found guilty of drug charges in 2018. The Global Affairs confirmed he is still alive. Joly did confirm the 4 who were killed were dual citizens, something China does not recognize.
That raises the question, do the Chinese make a difference between Caucasian foreigners and foreigners who are that they consider Chinese?
Good morning. After Canada arrested Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou at the request of the Americans in 2018, 4 Canadians were sentenced to death row in China, something Canadian and U.S. officials viewed as retaliation for the Meng arrest.
Diplomacy with China right now is difficult. It will continue to be difficult, especially if we see further tensions between U.S.-China relations.
The Chinese embassy did not confirm any executions, but defended their zero-tolerance attitude towards drug crimes. The facts of the crimes committed by Canadian nationals involved in the case are clear, and the evidence is solid and sufficient.
If you travel to China, you better not engage in drug trafficking.
According to Amnesty International, China has a 99.9% conviction rate, and appeals are rarely granted, Donna, leading China to have the highest execution rate of any country in the world.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. Chinese tariffs on Canadian exports start tomorrow. China is targeting $2.5 billion worth of Canadian agricultural and food products, including canola and pork. Exports to China and the U.S. are the lifeblood for producers of both those products. And as Heather Yorick's West reports, they are deeply worried about their future.
Fields across the prairies are weeks away from planting, but worry is already taking root.
I feel like on a park bench between 2 elephants. It's absolutely terrible. It's hard to deal with 1 set of tariffs, let alone 2.
90% of canola produced in Canada is exported, but as of March 20th, China is slapping on a 100% tariff on the canola meal and oil produced here. Then on April 2nd, the crop will see further tariffs on exports to the United States.
We've got 2 different markets that are basically our 2 biggest customers that now have tariffs against us. And that's basically, I don't think we can handle that.
That legacy of closed canola crush plants, canola crush facilities across Saskatchewan and across Canada would be the Liberal government's to wear.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe is calling on the federal government to engage with China to stop these tariffs before a federal election is called. Pork exports will face a 25% tariff from China this week, a hit from the industry's 3rd largest export market after the United States and Japan.
We send about $500 million worth of pork to China. You can't just, for example, take a container that's destined for China and say, oh, well, we'll send it to Mexico. It doesn't work that way. It's different product.
Long term, the industry says it will need to expand to new markets like the EU in order to survive.
We obviously need to work with Saskatchewan and with the farming community to help us diversify our trading relationships and to ideally work to see how we can actually get the tariffs taken off.
The agriculture sector facing a season of potential losses before seeds have even entered the ground. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
Countries' leaders don't normally take sides in another country's political campaign, but President Trump has shattered that. He belittled former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and now Trump says he might prefer to deal with a Liberal government instead of a Conservative one in Canada. The campaign hasn't begun yet, but it is widely expected the single biggest issue will be whether voters think Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre are best suited to take on Trump. And as David Akin reports, both parties know it.
I don't care.
An insult from the U.S. president.
The Conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less.
And then Donald Trump told his Fox News audience who he would prefer as Canada's next prime minister.
I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a Liberal. And maybe they're going to win, but I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me at all.
That's just the kind of talk Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been hoping for.
The president said that having a Liberal prime minister would be easier for him to deal with, just as he threatened once again to make us the 51st state. And you know what? On that point, it's true.
Conservative support has been crumbling in the last several weeks, so much so that several pollsters now have the Liberals leading the Tories.
At the moment, on issues of managing the economy, on issues of dealing with Trump, Mark Carney has the advantage.
And Poilievre has had to distance himself from the perception that he is Trump light, or that many of Poilievre's supporters are also Trump supporters. So when Trump himself says he'd prefer to deal with a Liberal, that was a plus for a Conservative campaign needing a boost.
Mark Carney will back down, and his Liberal policies will keep Canada weak, just like Trump wants. Giving the Liberals a fourth term will only weaken our country and strengthen Donald Trump.
Prime Minister Mark Carney was not speaking to reporters Wednesday, but ahead of a cabinet committee meeting, other ministers dismissed Poilievre's comments.
I think Canadians at the point at which there's an election are going to have a choice about Prime Minister, and the choice will be between somebody who actually managed Canada through the last recession and Britain through Brexit, and somebody who's never actually spent a day working in the private sector in his life.
I would say what we need now is seasoned, serious people at the helm of this country, and I think that's what Prime Minister Carney is bringing to that.
David is with me now. David, the Federal Conservative Party has informed the national media about a big change to how the Conservative leader's campaign will be covered. What restrictions is the party putting in place?
Well, the party will not let media travel with the leader during the election, and that has never been done by any federal party in a modern campaign, and it will make it more difficult to report on Pierre Poilievre's speeches, his rallies, to ask him questions. Difficult, but not impossible. Normally, Global News and other major media organizations, we pay our way to travel with the campaigning leader. Leaders may often have 3 or 4 events across different provinces, all in a single day. Well, not this time with the Tories. Donna.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. President Trump, who promised to end Russia's war on Ukraine in a day, is still working on it after failing yesterday to get Russia's president to agree to a full ceasefire. Today, Trump called Ukraine's president. It's the first time they've spoken since Trump bullied and pressured Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office more than 2 weeks ago. This call appears to have gone more smoothly, though as Redmond Shannon reports, there is still no ceasefire.
Just hours after the US and Russian presidents agreed that bombing energy infrastructure should be paused, explosions at an oil refinery in Russia and at a hospital in Ukraine. Kyiv says its energy facilities were hit too. Washington's special envoy told Bloomberg TV Vladimir Putin cancelled drone attacks after his call with Donald Trump.
I tend to believe that President Putin is operating in good faith. I take him at his word.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with Trump about further peace efforts Wednesday.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Their first meeting since that explosive Oval Office showdown. Zelensky's statement afterwards thanked Trump twice, and he said Ukraine is ready to implement a partial truce, although its details still need to be hammered out. Trump called it a very good call, putting peace efforts very much on track. The White House said the leaders discussed Ukraine's nuclear power plants, the largest of which is near the front lines and controlled by Russia.
American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
From the standpoint of Ukraine's officials, if the Americans have an ownership interest in it, they've got an interest in protecting those plants.
Trump said he'd work with Ukraine to find more air defenses, particularly from Europe. On Tuesday, Putin said there will be no permanent peace without an end to Western support for Ukraine. US officials will return to Saudi Arabia later this week, where they will hold separate meetings with their counterparts from Russia and Ukraine. Redmond Shannon Global News, London.
Huge plumes of smoke were seen over Gaza today. Israel's prime minister says combat has resumed in full force, ending the 2-month-long ceasefire. Gaza's health ministry says more than 430 Palestinians have been killed since Tuesday. Among the dead, the UN says, is one of its workers killed when a UN building was hit. Israel denies this. The Israeli army has issued new evacuation orders for civilians. It claims to be targeting Hamas militants in Gaza in an attempt to free the remaining Israeli hostages. Many Israelis are furious. Tens of thousands marched in Jerusalem today, outraged after the collapse of the ceasefire and efforts by Israel's prime minister to remove key security and judicial officials and renew highly controversial legislation to increase political power over the judiciary. Relatives of the Israeli hostages called out Benjamin Netanyahu, claiming he is putting his political survival ahead of the country's best interests. The showdown between the White House and the judicial system. Coming up, the fight over the legality of deporting nearly 300 undocumented migrants. The Alberta government is now tracking measles cases in that province as the numbers rise. There are 13 confirmed cases in Alberta now, and the numbers are updated daily on the provincial government website. It also outlines the symptoms, who is most at risk, and what people can do to protect themselves from the highly contagious virus. Number 1 is getting immunized. The province of Ontario will release weekly updates online, and the federal government also reports measles data provided by the provinces and territories on a weekly basis. 2 people were arrested in Montreal today for doing this, spray painting a Tesla store. They're with a group called Last Generation Canada. They believe Tesla CEO Elon Musk is destroying democracies. Attacks on Tesla vehicles and properties have been on the rise since President Trump took office and gave Musk the authority to slash federal spending. Tesla has also been removed from the Vancouver International Auto Show because of security concerns. In Washington, there's a standoff brewing between a top federal judge and the Trump administration. It involves mass deportations to El Salvador. The White House is pushing back on the court's request for more information about the flights, claiming President Trump has ultimate authority in the matter. A judge is giving the Trump administration one more day to hand over the details. As Jackson Prosco reports, it is testing how far Trump is willing to go.
They were deported to El Salvador over the objections of a federal judge. In court Wednesday, the Trump administration argued that judge is improperly intruding on the president's ability to handle a sensitive national security matter.
The judges in this country are acting erroneously. We have judges who are acting as partisan activists from the bench.
The White House continues to walk a fine line between disobeying the court and outright defiance of the law. On social media, Trump has said the judge who attempted to block the deportations should be impeached, drawing a rare rebuke from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who wrote in part, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to a disagreement concerning a judicial decision."
Well, he didn't mention my name in the statement. I just saw it quickly. He didn't mention my name.
In an interview with Fox News, Trump seemed to walk back from the brink of a full-blown constitutional crisis, insisting he would ultimately abide by court rulings.
We have very bad judges, and these are judges that shouldn't be allowed.
Judges do not like it if they think that you're not abiding by their orders.
Legal experts see it as a test of how far the administration is willing to go. a showdown over who has ultimate authority.
I think this is going to be a constant and recurring theme throughout the Trump administration, where the executive branch is going to try to act fast, it's going to try to act in an aggressive way, and the court's going to be trying to pump the brakes.
There is urgency behind the matter because there's no way to know if all the men who were deported are actually gang members, as Trump has claimed.
The government is accusing them of that without evidence.
Further flights are on hold for now, but the administration insists the president has the right and the will to resume deportations. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Americans standing up for Canadians ahead how the trade war is playing out in one border state.
Do you support the annexation of Canada and/or Greenland? And this is a yes or no question. I don't want you to wander off into the woods.
Some Republican lawmakers have been facing angry constituents at town halls like this one. They're getting direct questions about President Trump's threat to make Canada the 51st U.S. state and those punishing tariffs he's imposing. Some Americans are paying attention to what's happening with Canada and are willing to stand up for their northern neighbors. Touria Izri traveled to Vermont, just across the Quebec border, to hear from people who want the White House to back off.
1, 2, 3, elbows up.
It's not only Canadians getting their elbows up, but these Americans as well.
There's no justification for these tariffs. None.
Democratic Senator Peter Welch warns the Trump administration's tariff war will only backfire.
I'm really appalled at the U.S. policy right now. I think Trump is making a huge mistake.
For what history?
And in many cases, one economy. This off-road utility vehicle company is quite literally stuck in the middle.
Terrible. Don't think it's good for anybody.
The business is cross-border, and so are the products.
So I'm Mike Demaris in Vermont and Michel Desmarais in Quebec. So I'm a dual citizen.
Employees and parts go back and forth between Vermont and Quebec.
Our products, if they cross the border 5 or 6 times, will have multiple tariffs on tariffs, and it just doesn't make sense.
As much as Vermont relies on Canada for business, many people here say they understand and empathize with the decision of many Canadians to boycott American travel and U.S. products.
Canadians don't want to visit, and I frankly can't blame them.
I think that helped.
Steve Wright is the president of Jay Peak Ski Resort, one of the largest employers in the area.
The tariffs are an ignorant approach for our administration to take. And worse than that for me is the challenge to Canadian sovereignty, which makes no sense whatsoever.
When we think about it, Liberal MP Marie-Claude Bibeau traveled stateside for the meeting.
Prime Minister Carney is still on this page as well. We can't be bullied.
But she's preaching to the choir. While Vermont has a Republican governor, it's widely viewed as one of the most progressive states.
The senators who are supporting Trump are going to have to make a decision. Do they want to stick with Trump when it's hurting the people they represent?
These Americans realize that. The question is, how much hurt will it take for Trump's allies to admit it publicly? Touria Izri, Global News, Newport, Vermont.
6 teenagers have been charged after a failed robbery at a jewelry store in Toronto. It happened on Friday while police were tracking a stolen vehicle.
They are masked up, boys. They are ready to do something. They're looking around. They're looking at the windows.
This video released today shows the teens carrying sledgehammers trying to break into the store. They did not succeed and tried to flee in a stolen car. A 7th suspect is still on the loose. Next, another group of thieves got caught. Why their robbery caused a stink. There are lots of stories about robberies, valuable jewelry, or priceless paintings. The one we are focusing on tonight is about a work of art that is as unusual as it is ordinary. It's a fully functional toilet made of gold, and tracking down who stole it is quite the tale. We asked Mike Armstrong to try to tone down the puns.
If it could speak, this country mansion northwest of London would undoubtedly say it would prefer to be known for something else. Blenheim Palace was the ancestral home of Winston Churchill. Last summer, the king used it to host the president of Ukraine. But this grainy surveillance video from 2019 tells a stranger and considerably less classy tale. At the time, the palace was showcasing an exhibition by Italian artist Maurizio Cattelan. There were pieces in several rooms, including a bathroom. The toilet was 18 carats solid gold, worth about $9 million. And yes, because you're wondering, fully functional. Which brings us back to the surveillance video and 3 men making off with the toilet, ripping it out, flooding the floors, and turning the exhibit into a crime scene.
I find it extraordinary that, somebody could break in like that, to a place like this.
Now, from that first day, there was nervousness that whoever stole the toilet might not fully appreciate its satirical critique of excess and wealth.
The fear is this has not been taken by art lovers, but taken by people who wish to convert it to its base ingredient, gold.
Well, police didn't have a tough time finding the men responsible. One of them had actually visited the exhibition the day before the robbery and used the toilet. At trial, he reviewed it with one word, splendid. This week, the jury's one word was guilty. As it turns out, police say the toilet was indeed broken up and sold in pieces, relegated to art history, and a rather strange chapter. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
He used the toilet. That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada showcases Somerville, New Brunswick, Elliott Lake, Ontario, and Crow's Nest Lake near Crow's Nest Pass, Alberta. Keep them coming, and thanks for watching. I will be back here next week. Bye-bye.